Ukraine could end the war with Russia at any time if it wanted to. So says US President Donald Trump. What he hasn't been so vocal about is what he expects Russia to concede in order to get the deal done. Is the handover of Ukrainian territory a fair price to pay for peace? That debate coming up on CounterPoints with me, Melinda Nusafora. No getting Ukraine back, handing over the Donbass region, and no joining NATO. The terms of Trump's latest peace push demands a high price from Ukraine. In return, Kyiv's allies would provide future security.
It means that the United States is potentially prepared to be able to give Article 5 security guarantees, but not from NATO, directly from the United States and other European countries. That is big. I mean, really big.
But can and should Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy concede territory if NATO membership is off the table? It's certainly at odds with what European leaders have been pushing for. Kyiv's allies are on hand in Washington for the latest Trump-Zelenskyy meeting. Safety in numbers to try to avoid a repeat of that ill-fated White House meeting back in February. But in the face of President Trump's transactional style of diplomacy, their presence may not amount to much. On this episode of CounterPoints, we'll ask, should Ukraine pursue peace at any price? Has the US proven itself a reliable mediator? And what does Trump's latest peace deal mean for Europe? Stay with us. Joining us to debate the latest peace plan is Christopher Steele, a former MI6 officer who led the Russia desk at the UK's Secret Intelligence Service. Brendan Weichert is joining us, former US Congressional Staffer and geopolitical analyst. And rounding out our panel is Peter Zalmayev, political scientist and director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here on CounterPoints. Well, once again, all eyes are on the White House as Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelenskyy and US President Donald Trump sit down to talk peace. But if the outcome of the recent Alaska summit with Putin is anything to go by, Ukraine could be in for a tough time. President Trump has even suggested that if Ukraine really wanted to end the war, it could do it at any time. So, Peter, let's start with you. Should Ukraine pursue peace at any price?
Well, let me just start by saying that if Russia, wanted to end the war, it would be very easy. All it had to do would be to leave Ukraine. Whatever formula is being proposed for Ukraine, there's lots of details we don't know about. And to your question as to whether it should end the war at any price, well, yes, there is a price. And it smells to me like the price that would be Ukraine's very sovereignty that is being kind of offered or imposed on Ukraine. The formula of exchanging some Ukrainian land for some other Ukrainian land. I mean, you have to consider the unfairness of it from the outset. And of course, there's a fear that Ukraine is walking into a ambush here, into a trap, whereby if Zelenskyy signs off on this land, the handover of the land, or at least decides to consider this issue, this could bring him down. This could lead to unrest on the streets of Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, and there's no clear mechanism how to do that. Neither the president nor the parliament are at liberty to be giving away Ukrainian land. It requires a national referendum, and imagine holding one in a time of war like this. It's a recipe for chaos. Putin knows it. That's why whatever's being offered, if that's what's being offered, is a poison pill. And I'll just finish. The other option to say no to that may lead to another bust-up, something what we saw the last time in the Oval Office, and it would allow Putin to point finger at Ukraine and say, Donnie, look, it's the Ukrainians who don't want peace, the intransigent party. It's not me. So darned if you don't, damned if you do, so to speak. Very, very precarious position. And you could tell by the way President Zelenskyy is looking, kind of shaky.
Shaky indeed. Brandon, what do you think? Are they damned if they do, damned if they don't? Or is President Trump correct in saying if Ukraine wanted to end the war, it could?
Well, I'll just say, you know, the unfortunate reality is General Sherman, the great U.S. Civil War general, said war is brutal, war is hell. And the war has not gone well for Ukraine, unfortunately. And the Russians have all of the advantages right now. And there's no way the Ukrainians are going to be able to reverse those trends. So the Ukrainians would actually be very smart to seek a negotiated settlement. The Russians are wanting the eastern portion in Crimea as well. Those are the parts that they've held on to the entire war. So if you ask me, it's never been a more straightforward deal. It's just all the emotional garbage is in the way now. And I would just add, Gallup did a poll back in November, and they found that more than half of all Ukrainians polled favor a, quote, quick and speedy negotiation to end the war. So I don't even buy that it would be politically bad for Zelenskyy to do this, to negotiate. He's choosing not to, and you have to ask yourself why. And why is he choosing to arrive in the White House not even wearing a suit, as was the one requirement that the White House had for him meeting with our president? It is a problem. It is a sign of disrespect, I think. And I think Americans are ready to move on, get a deal, or we're going to cut him off, I think is what's going to happen.
Christopher, I'm going to come to you, but I know, Peter, you want to respond there. Sartorial choices, is that really what this is coming down to?
Why is the MAGA crowd not berating Arab monarchs and dignitaries who come garbed in their national costumes? Why are you not down on them for not wearing a Western suit?
Is it a cultural custom to wear a T-shirt to the White House? It's a cultural custom for the Arabs to wear what they wear, sir. It's not a cultural custom. We know for a fact Zelenskyy has worn a suit. I've seen him up close wearing a suit back in 2019. This is all part of an act. It is not. It's nothing to do with MAGA. It has to do with the respect for the American people and our White House. And I frankly am sick of it.
All of this rhetoric is out the window. I mean, you should have just opened your eyes and seen that Zelenskyy did arrive in a suit. So how about an apology? How about an apology?
He's wearing a black shirt. He's wearing a black button-up.
And a suit jacket.
A suit and tie.
Sir, you have no shame. It's a country at war, and you're nitpicking about his sartorial choices. I say shame on you. Shame on you.
Okay.
You have lost all sensitivity and all sense of propriety because your boss in the White House has completely lost all sense of propriety.
Okay, Christopher, why don't you weigh in on this?
This is disgusting. May I just add one more thing? Finally, sorry.
Yeah, scream a little more. Spittle a little more.
Territorial concessions. What's being now demanded is that Ukraine leave the currently territory that is still controlling in the Donbass. It's not just what Russia has controlled. What's being demanded is that Ukraine
Why don't we ask a rational question here, sir?
Okay, just a moment, Brandon.
Here. How long do you think Ukraine can actually hold on? Another 4 years in that part of the country? Is that what you believe? Because we've breached our war reserve status here with our stockpiles, and we cannot replenish them without stopping the war. And you know that, or you should. You are shameless. You don't care. You want to keep sending young men to die. They're going to have weapons soon. We don't have the ability to keep them supplied, not with this thing in the Middle East ripping open. And you know that, and you don't care. And that is shameful. It's young men that are dying over there.
Okay, Brandon and Peter, hold that thought. I'm going to come back to it. Christopher, I want you to weigh in on what we've been hearing so far.
I don't particularly want to get into what clothes people are wearing, although, of course, Churchill during the Second World War wore something similar and didn't turn up at the White House in a suit. But that aside, I think, you've got to concentrate on what this is really about. And it's about Putin, in fact, not changing his position at all. He's offered really no concessions. The only possible concession is that he's mentioned a possible security guarantee from the West to Ukraine if Ukraine rolls over. I think what you're talking about here is it's not just an exchange of land. Land is one of the things that's being discussed. But you're talking about the future of Ukraine, really, as an independent, sovereign country that is free to make its own choices. And that would include, in due course, possibly, although not definitely, applying to join NATO. What you can't have is a situation where one sovereign power imposes its will on a smaller country and there are no checks and balances, and in fact is illegal under international law. This whole war is illegal under international law. Putin is an indicted war criminal, and the West should really be united in standing up against this challenge to the post-Second World War system.
Peter, if, just to what Christopher is saying about NATO, are US security guarantees worth anything to Ukraine if NATO is off the table?
Let's see what those security guarantees are. So far, I've heard from the American president that it may be a written statement by the Russian side that it would never attack Ukraine. We've been down that road before. The Budapest Memorandum of 1994, was it worth the paper it was written on? It was co-guaranteed by several other parties to Russia, US, and Britain. Ukraine turned over its nuclear arsenal from the Soviet era in return for this guarantee. Look what it's gotten us down the road. So no, we also have this rare minerals and earths agreement with the American side as well, with US. That was supposed to be a kind of guarantee, a sort of a roundabout way of guaranteeing Ukraine's security, but in world history, it's never kind of worked that way. There's never a precedent for it. Just because the US does business in a certain country, no other country attacks it. Well, how many Western companies were doing business in Ukraine prior to 2014, the first Russian aggression and the takeover of Crimea? There were all sorts of Western companies, including American companies. Did that prevent Putin from attacking? So I really have to see, I want to give the benefit of the doubt to Donald Trump for wanting to end this war. But what are those guarantees? It's almost like there's an expression actually in Russian. You're buying a cat in a bag. You don't know if the cat is alive, it has one eye, both eyes, and that's what's actually happening right now in Washington as we speak.
So it is happening in Washington as we're on air. Brandon, we're hearing from the White House that President Trump is not ruling out sending US troops to keep peace in Ukraine. So if your big concern is that the US can't afford to keep supporting Ukraine in its war, it sounds like President Trump is interested in committing long-term to the peace.
President Trump says a lot of things in the moment. The question is, after the moment, what's the execution? I don't believe, given his promises to his base, that he would deploy U.S. forces on the ground in Ukraine. That is a line that not even the dreaded Joe Biden would assent to, and he was under a lot of pressure during his term to do that. So I don't think that that's anything serious. I think Trump's trying to keep everybody talking, which I understand and can agree with on some level, but I don't think that's a serious point. Furthermore, we know that he does not want to get more involved in Ukraine. We saw that, the Alaska summit. The one takeaway is Trump is already, and his team are already looking at the post-Ukraine war scenario. How do we get rare earth mineral deals with Russia? How do we get oil and natural gas deals with Russia? How do we possibly cut them into this Zangezur corridor that's being created in Azerbaijan that will completely redefine East-West trading relations in Eurasia? And that is critical because it is in America's interest to pull Russia away from China. And you do that through trade and other positive geoeconomic momentum, not by constantly fighting with them over Ukraine, which I'm sorry to say is a peripheral interest to the United States.
Christopher, in one of Brandon's earlier answers, he said there could be a quick and speedy end to this war, that it's something that Ukrainians want to push for. Do you think that conceding the Donbass region, signing away the land as it stands on the front lines at the moment would mean a quick and speedy end, but a lingering threat? I mean, is this not just setting the stage for a future war?
Yes, I think all this boils down to ultimately is whether Vladimir Putin can be trusted when he signs an agreement. The fact is that not only has he violated 2 agreements signed on Ukrainian sovereignty in the 1990s by his predecessor, but he himself actually signed an agreement with Ukraine in 2003, a borders agreement, which clearly he's violated as well. My contention, my feeling about this and everything I know about Putin is that we can't trust him and that there's not going to be any just peace in Ukraine for as long as he's in office. And that's the terrible obstacle for those of us who want to see peace in Ukraine and want to see Ukraine flourish as an emerging democracy and an emerging market economy. That's the basic problem we're facing.
Brandon, what do you think? Is Putin untrustworthy?
I don't really care if he's trustworthy or untrustworthy. I care about the facts on the ground. The facts on the ground are he's got us by the soft spot right now, and there's no way to worm our way out of this. So we have to negotiate with this guy, because the alternative is he's going to keep pushing forward, and we're going to run out of stuff to give him, or work to give Ukraine. Or worse, we're going to commit possibly NATO forces on the ground in Ukraine. This is not in America's interest to risk a direct confrontation with nuclear-armed Russia, especially not right now, given what's going on around the world. We need to be sequencing ourselves out of this fight, and we need to be pushing ourselves toward containing China. That is a greater threat to my country than Russia will ever be. And this is the consistent thing you hear from America First people who are still in the Pentagon. Thankfully, they are listening to this, and we're going to continue advocating to get out of Ukraine. It's not in America's interest. And I would just argue it is actually a straightforward deal. The parts of Ukraine that Russia has held are the parts that they would get in any deal. The real sticking point's going to be Odessa. Russia wants to take Odessa. Right now, they haven't. And so if we get a deal going now, there's a chance we could save Odessa for Western Ukraine. Otherwise, the Russians are going to push and push and push and push until they get Odessa. And then whatever happens after that is going to be a rump Ukrainian state that is completely landlocked and a welfare case for Europe, because they won't be able to produce economically anything without that trade corridor. So in my opinion, we need to get a deal now. It's for the best thing for the Ukrainians as well as the Americans.
Peter, do you want to comment on that before we move to our next section?
Can I go back on that?
Both of, yeah, all right. Peter, go first, and then Chris will come to you.
Yeah, I'll just say that, okay, we talk about, like, we are in a tight place. I think Brennan is talking about the United States. Well, if Donald Trump has actually followed up his threats with actions, and he's promised to levy sanctions on Putin time and again, and then these deadlines have come and gone, and apparently the American president's word is worth nothing. As Brennan himself said, Donald Trump talks a lot, and he actually has no responsibility for what he says. It's a constant politics of gaslighting and deflection from Epstein files or whatever. But the thing is, there's no credibility left on the part of the American policymaking. The Americans, and Donald Trump has way many more cards than he lets on. Russia is actually on very much on the back foot when it comes to its economy. For some reason, in swoops Donald Trump and decides to save Russia from this. Russia is crumbling economically, and instead we have to salvage it. And also this idea, this cockamamie idea that you can decouple Russia from China. Russia is beholding. Russia has become an essential protectorate of Russia economically. This is a cockamamie, ridiculous idea. Let's meet here on this program 3 years down the road, Brandon, and we'll see where Russia will be. It's a ridiculous idea that the likes of Tucker Carlson.
I'd like to address the sanctions. I'd like to keep this civil.
Okay, we're going to come to sanctions. We're going to come to sanctions in our next segment, and I'll put it to you first, Brandon. Christopher, give us a quick response, and then we'll move on to Trump and sanctions.
Yes, I agree, actually, that China in the longer term is probably a bigger challenge for the West. But I would say that if we allow Putin to prevail in Ukraine and get what he wants, and particularly to upset the territorial balance of Ukraine and the sovereignty, then that will simply encourage countries like China in particular to do the same with Taiwan and other places. And I think it sets a terrible precedent worldwide for international chaos and disorder, as various states think that they can change the borders by force.
All right. Well, on that, if we're going to talk about mediation, we're going to talk about how the US has positioned itself in that mediation. So ahead of the Alaska meeting that we saw last Friday between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, President Trump was teasing reporters on the plane, saying that something big was going to come out of it. And yet it ended with no ceasefire, no concrete agreement, no lasting deal. The president had also threatened Russia with tough sanctions and secondary tariffs, just as our guests have just been discussing, if it didn't reach a ceasefire deal within his set time frame. But that deadline came and went without any repercussions as well. So, Brandon, coming back to you, as I said I would, has the US proven itself an unreliable or ineffective mediator in this conflict? Because it seems that President Trump doesn't follow through with what he says he'll do.
So this is a very real problem, not the fact that he said this. The problem is we don't have any more economic arrows in our quiver, if you will. We have thrown every sanction imaginable since the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014. We have thrown everything that we could muster at the Russians. And the Russians, people seem to forget, the Russians are a commodities superpower. They have the ability to be self-sustaining. They have the ability to sell vast amounts of energy, rare earth minerals, etc., to countries notably in the global south. So now when people talk about sanctions, what they're really talking about is not sanctions against Russia. We've done all that. What they're talking about is sanctions now against India, sanctions against a country like India that we absolutely require to have on side in order to contain China, which is, again, the bigger threat to my country. And so the Ukrainians would have us alienate, we're already doing it, alienate India. We've already alienated them over other issues, but we're going to alienate India now. We're going to put them into the BRICS camp, which they're now moving toward, and at the expense of our grand strategy, also that Ukraine can maybe last on another 6 months in the war. Instead, the rational thing to do would be to say, sanctions are a canard. They don't work anymore. We've done everything. The Russians, according to Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, Rutte said earlier this year that the Russian defense industrial base is producing every 3 months that which it takes the entirety of NATO's industrial base to produce in a single year. There is no more fight. The war is over, and it's time to get a negotiated settlement so we can salvage something of Ukraine. And I disagree as well about this idea that, well, the Russians go into Ukraine, the Taiwanese or the Chinese are going to go into Taiwan. I think that could happen anyway. These countries don't care about our international law. It's very quaint to them. And frankly, the United States doesn't really operate according to international law anyway. Ask anybody living in the Middle East. So it doesn't. This is a moot point. It's a new world order. It's a tripolar system. America, China, and Russia are going to have to figure out a new way to do business so we don't end up in a nuclear world war, which is where this thing could easily head.
Christopher, what do you make of that? I mean, is Ukraine just a pawn in between these three new superpowers?
No, Ukraine is the testing ground for international law and international relations at the moment. And I think it is rather curious, in fact, that China is the main facilitator of Russia in the war against Ukraine, not India. And yet China hasn't been hit with specific secondary sanctions
because of the rare earths.
Banking system is, well, for whatever reason. If China is actually the target, if China is the main threat, then China has to be the one that's targeted, not India. And there are other countries.
But then they cut us off from the rare earths, Chris. They cut us off from the rare earths, and that's the problem. This is why we're bending to them on NVIDIA chips going. I mean, so this is, again, Russia could help us alleviate some of that rare earth mineral dependency, and we're not taking them up on that because of this Ukraine thing. It's time to end it. It's gone too far now.
The degree to which China and Russia are becoming interwoven economically and technologically is quite astounding. And I think it's naive to think that we can cuddle up to Russia and Russia will suddenly come off the shelf and be aligned with us and aligned with our interests, because it won't. Putin sees the world in a zero-sum way, and particularly with regard to the United States, which he regards as his main adversary and always will, as a former KGB officer. And so I just don't see how giving parts of Ukraine over to Russia or pressurizing Ukraine to give territory to Russia.
They've already taken those parts, is my point.
Combating China. It just shows weakness, in my opinion.
Just a moment, Brandon, before you weigh in again, I want to bring Peter in and then we'll get your response. Peter, I can see you trying to interject.
I agree with Christopher made a great point. I mean, I think this is a faulty understanding of Putin's end goal here, and that's what the debate is. Putin is not interested in some parts of Ukraine that he, in fact, already controls. Why would he need Ukraine to sign off on that, right? What are the carrots for him here? He wants all of Ukraine, and all you have to do is listen to his own pronouncement on this issue. And the very first day at 5 a.m. on the 24th, February 2022, as he was speaking and the bombs started falling in Kyiv, and I woke up, and my family of 2 young kids woke up, the blackest day of our lives. And he said that there's no Ukrainian nation. There's just one people. It's a misunderstanding. Ukrainians have no right to their own state. He's repeated it again and again and again. All you have to do is to go to the Telegram channel of the former president and current, bigwig in the hierarchy of Putin, Dmitry Medvedev. His rhetoric is pure genocidal, reminiscent of Radio Thousand Hills of Rwanda. He's calling Ukrainians cockroaches, insects that have to be eliminated, along with the Europeans that support them. That is the former Russian president speaking. But people like Brennan going around and repeating Kremlin's misinformation about, we just want a little bit of the land that U.S. serving.
So we've reached the point that I'm now suddenly a Russian apologist.
Who have tried to fool you into thinking that they were nothing short of Ukraine's capitulation. I agree with Christopher. Putin, for as long as he's alive, he has staked everything on the outcome of Ukraine. He wants Ukraine destroyed, period.
Brandon, do you think that President Trump really wants peace? Or does President Trump really want the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I think they're both linked, aren't they? I mean, he's not going to get it. Well, first of all, he's never going to get the Peace Prize. They're never going to give him the Peace Prize no matter what. But ultimately, I think the president has made it very clear in the last 96 hours, in fact, that we need to just go to a peace deal and not talk about an armistice or a ceasefire. We need to get peace. And why? Because we're going to build a durable order based off of that peace. It's the new peace at Westphalia, if you will. It's a new peace that will bring a new world order. And a lot of people in the old system aren't going to like it. And unfortunately, the old system is dead. And so everybody here who's arguing in favor of a liberal international order, that's gone. In fact, it probably went away the moment the U.S. invaded Iraq. So that stuff doesn't exist anymore. It's a new system. There are new players coming into the fold, and we got to figure out how we're going to play ball, because this is not going to end well. And I would just say, this idea that somehow Putin started the war based on he already held the territories. There was a lot going on, and we don't have to get into the whole 20-year history, but there was a lot going on both sides. It took two to tango that led to the impasse in 2022. It wasn't just the Russian side that woke up one day as mustache-twirling villains. It was terrible what they did, but it was not just one side. There was a whole buildup over 20 years. Go back to 1994. Former President Boris Yeltsin warned his counterpart, Bill Clinton, of the so-called cold peace that was descending over Europe about NATO expansion. And nobody wants to ever talk about that on the globalist side. Everybody wants to talk about liberal international order. Those days are done. We need to get a deal. We need to move on fast.
We're seeing European leaders obviously not playing a particularly active role in mediation. Earlier on Monday, President Zelenskyy said, as he was heading towards the White House, when peace is discussed for one country in Europe, it means peace for all of Europe. The Ukrainian president is joined in the US by a host of European leaders keen to provide him some backup. But by and large, President Trump has sidelined the EU during his negotiations to end this war. And the deal he's been talking about runs pretty counter to what many European leaders have been pushing for. Chris, if we look at this in a broader regional sense now, Europe wants to end the war in part to ensure its own security. Will it be safer or in more danger if that war ends with Russia taking control of Crimea and the Donbass?
My own view is it will be more dangerous, because I think what Russia will seek to do is get sanctions lift from the US and other Western countries, will go back and try and rebuild its severely battered military. I mean, if you consider that they've lost, killed and wounded around 1 million men in this war, and they haven't really advanced much in 2 to 3 years. It's quite astounding. But I think the threat comes to Europe or to Eastern Europe, not so much, and NATO member states, of course, in the Baltics and elsewhere, not so much in the next 6 months or a year, but in the next 5 to 10 years, when Russia could well rearm and re-equip and come back for more. Because I do believe deep down that what Putin is trying to do for his legacy is to rebuild the old Soviet Union. And I don't think he's going to stop in Ukraine.
Sorry, Peter, I see you nodding your head there. Do you think that European leaders being by President Zelensky's side is going to make any difference during negotiations in the White House? Because it doesn't seem like President Trump really cares much about what Europe thinks.
Just to piggyback on what Christopher said, yes, Zbigniew Brzezinski is reported to have said that without Ukraine, Russia is not an empire. I wholeheartedly agree that Putin is on a historical mission to restore the Soviet Union. Should Ukraine fail in this war, you're talking about millions of more Ukrainian refugees spilling over the border of the Western world. And that explains the urgency of this incredibly high-level group that is accompanying Zelensky. One gentleman whom I know personally, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, has found a key to Donald Trump's heart, and that is simply shameless flattery. That's the only thing that works with that guy. And he's been quite capable at handling Donald Trump. My hope is that Rutte is able to at least balance out and get some of that infatuation once again with Putin that Donald Trump is displaying. Just kind of take the edge of it, right, and bring him down to earth, and and make him realize that Russia is not a natural ally of the United States. It's the West. It's still yes, it's an idea largely, but if America loses Europe, I mean, what allies will it have? Or if Brandon says we're just living in a transactional world that resembles the inside of Donald Trump's head, and that's exactly how he speaks as well. I call this Trumpkins. This is a category of Trumpkins. They're shameless. Brandon would not have 5 years ago. You had told Brandon he would be speaking like this. He would not have believed it. He would have left you out of this room. I hope and pray that they do prevail, but I cannot predict this. There may be possible another bust up, and Zelensky may be expelled from the White House, because that's the kind of show that Donald Trump likes to throw as a bone to his rabid MAGA base.
Brandon?
So the amount of hatred that you have for the MAGA base, most of whom populate my country's armed services, is disgusting. And I am offended by that. And you should be ashamed, because my country is the only reason Ukraine is even a country right now. And we're sick of it. We are sick of it. And I'm telling you right now that the Europeans who showed up to try to bully the president of the United States, the Europeans are going to go and bully him and flatter him to death. I think you guys are going to be in for a rude awakening. I think it's coming sooner than you think, because we're done. We've made that eminently clear, and you continue dishing out insults. You continue being completely ungrateful for that which my country has done for you. The British were never like this in World War II. We were partners. But the Ukrainians who keep saying they're like Britain in World War II are acting, the government is acting, I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the government, is acting very, very ungrateful. And my only hope is that these rumors I'm hearing about Zelensky possibly replacing Zelensky in a track 2 approach, I am praying to God that that will happen, because Zelensky has completely overplayed his hand and overstayed his term in office, by the way. The great democracy hasn't had an election in over a year.
I'm going to come to you on that in a moment, Peter, but Christopher, I could see you making a face which makes me think you disagree with some of Brandon's interpretations.
Yeah, I don't think the Ukrainians have overplayed their hand. They were attacked aggressively and illegally by Russia for no reason. And whilst we can debate whether, the eastward expansion of NATO was a good idea or not, I actually think it probably wasn't. The fact is that Ukraine was nowhere near joining NATO, and the excuse that's been made by the Russians for that, they themselves, under Putin incidentally, were interested in joining NATO in year 2000. Yes. So I think that we need to get the history right. We need to get the facts right of this. We need to get the sequencing right about this. And I don't think the Ukrainians are ungrateful. I mean, I think they obviously want to get as many weapons and as much money in to support their war efforts.
We've given them everything we possibly could. We've given them everything we possibly could. And
that's not entirely true, because as you probably know, there are about $500 billion worth of Russian central bank assets that have been frozen in the West. Most interestingly, actually, in Europe, not in the US. But that is certainly
if you want to kill the US dollar as the primary reserve currency, you're going to do that. That's what you're going to do, and you're going to kill the dollar as the primary currency. They're going to start going hard into BRICS then.
No.
The rest of the world isn't going to go for that.
Most of those assets are in euros, in fact, defined in euros, and are contained in Europe. And I think it's incumbent on Europe to look at more seriously freeing up that, because I agree that the US has made a massive contribution to the defense of Ukraine, and that is a great thing. So has Europe. But I think Europe could do more.
Well, I just
hope that Europe, for example, could use those reserves to buy weapons for Ukraine from the US, which is a win-win for the US and Europe going forward.
Peter, what do you think? Is this just European leaders trying to bully the US president? Can Europe have any effect on the sidelines here, or is that just window dressing for the main game?
No, it's not about bullying. It's about explaining, to actually trying to get on the same page with Donald Trump circa 3 months ago, right? Because like Brennan said, Donald Trump says a lot of things, right? He's a different person every day. But you remember 3 months ago, he said, it's Europe's war. That's J.D. Vance's position. That's Donald Trump's position. And you know what? I'll give it to them. It makes sense. It is Europe's war, first and foremost. It's happening on the continent. America is separated by the oceans. And so if that's the case, they're explaining to Donald Trump that it has affected us. It will affect the rest of the world should Ukraine fall. They have found a really elegant formula, to use Mike Johnson's actually words. The Speaker of the House, paying for the weapons produced in America, supporting the American economy with Russia's money. An elegant solution, a poetry. I think he said it, a poetry. Donald Trump said he will not mind selling Ukraine weapons using Europe's money. At the very least, we need to hold on to that formula. Or is that off the table?
Are you asking me? Is that off the table? I would think anything's on the table at this point. I think we're having a misunderstanding here. The U.S. defense industrial base, I've covered this for years. The U.S. defense industrial base cannot meet demand. Doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. It is sclerotic right now. It cannot meet the increasing demands of the Middle East and the European theater. It can't do it. It doesn't matter how much business you give it. It cannot do it. This is not like World War II, where we had latent industrial capacity. We do not. The president of Raytheon, I think it was Raytheon, said about 2 years ago, you want to go to war with China, 69% of our defense industrial base is supplied either directly or indirectly via China. So we are not doing well right now with defense industrial base production, which is why, despite all the money and all the demand, our base still cannot produce what Ukraine needs to go on. This is why we're talking about a peace deal. This is why the Trump people are saying we're going to need to stop the fighting, because our base can't do it anymore. Manufacturing and logistics are not what they once were in this country. And I've been saying that to these guys for years, and I get called whatever, all the names you want to call me that you've been calling me. But that's the truth. And that's all I look at. I look at the data. I can't, make bricks without clay, as Sherlock said. So.
Peter, what did you make of Brandon's comment that President Zelenskyy has outstayed his welcome and that he could potentially be toppled in order to get a deal here?
Well, that's another thing that worries me. Listen, we don't all have to be, we're not Russia. I mean, as Ukrainians, we still, even in time of war, can express our disagreement with Zelenskyy and his policies. For example, I did not vote for Zelenskyy. I'm not necessarily his supporter, even though I don't criticize him when I'm traveling outside of Ukraine, etc. He's still our president, and he cannot be replaced because the Ukraine's constitution does not allow for holding of elections during, times of war. And that's what worries me, that Donald Trump seems to have turned into a retranslator, rebroadcaster of Russia's narratives and Russia's wishes. It started with Tucker Carlson and his ignominious trip to Moscow, and then it proceeded, and now it wound up in in the mouth of the American president. Russia wants Zelenskyy out, and of course they want someone pliable, Petain, the General Petain of the Vichy Republic. Yes, they would want
Is
that. And that's
Zelenskyy
exactly
more pliable?
what they're after.
I would think Zelenskyy would be better because he has more credibility with all the parties.
Would Russians support Zelenskyy? I know Zelenskyy, and I like him dearly. I consider him my elder friend, personal friend. Would Russia countenance that? I have very serious doubts about that.
I don't think the fact of the matter is he wanted to negotiate a year ago a settlement, and Zelenskyy fired him as a result. And I think that carries a lot of cachet right now. The fact that Zelenskyy is a rational person who actually saw the young men going to get killed and didn't like it because he realized the strategy was not and could never work. That's a very big thing, I think, for everybody involved. You want rational actors at that table, not people who are, talking about taking back Crimea or whatever. I mean, this is insanity masquerading as policy.
Christopher, what do you think? I mean, we're talking about bringing in someone who hasn't even been elected. Is that a concern? Is there a world where Trump brings in a different player so that he can get a deal?
I don't think there's anything at all wrong with Zelenskyy as a potential president of Ukraine. He would have to be elected, of course, in order to be consistent that we're supporting a democracy. And there's no reason why he shouldn't be elected. But I think that's not going to happen overnight. And he's, of course, here as ambassador in London, doing good work actually here. But I think that we've got to focus on the players at the table at the moment, and that is Zelenskyy, who after all was elected. And I think it's perfectly understandable there hasn't been an election in Ukraine in the last few years. When that happened in Britain during World War II, there wasn't an election here either. But as soon as the war was over, there was, and there was a change of leadership. But that whole issue about change of peaceful leadership through the ballot box is what is being fought for here. So I see Zelenskyy as somebody who can contribute a great deal to this. Military officers often don't like war because they see what it leads to and the suffering it entails, and can bring some sober analysis to the table. But I don't think there's any way that Zelenskyy would support the sort of deal that's on the table at the moment that would require hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to leave their homes and defensive lines in eastern Ukraine, which is controlled by Kyiv, and move out for no price.
Gentlemen, we're almost out of time. I just want to ask one very quick question to each of you to wrap up this last segment of Counterpoints. So, Peter, I'll start with you very, very briefly. We're hearing from the White House, US President Donald Trump saying that we may or may not have trilateral talks between Zelenskyy, Putin and himself. This far in, this many discussions, this many summits, are we any closer to peace?
I'm not sure. And, both sides, to be frank, have kind of boxed themselves in with this potential meeting. Putin clearly does not consider Zelenskyy a legitimate negotiation partner. And conversely, Ukraine has made it a law early in the war whereby it's illegal to hold peace talks with Putin. You can argue about the wisdom of this later down the road. I'm not commenting on that. But it seems like this meeting is, for that reason and others, is still a very distant perspective.
What do you think, Brandon? With this far in, this many years of war, this many leaders' summits, this many ceasefire and peace talks, are we any closer to a deal?
Jaw is always better than war, and I think that this is a positive step. We'll see where it goes. I would just say that the United States is no longer in a position where it can afford to support this war. It needs to end now. It's a ridiculous thing that it's gone on this long. If we don't get an end, we're risking a world war here, and the United States might not be able to win that, given the depletion that's going on in our wartime stockpiles. And I don't. So yes, I think that this is a positive step toward peace, and my hope is we get that tripolar system going to create a new, more lasting peace.
Christopher, round us out. President Trump from the White House saying we may or may not have a trilateral meeting. Is this making any progress?
Well, I think if we do have a trilateral meeting, that is a good thing. But my understanding and my assessment of things today is that Putin can't actually bring himself, or isn't able to bring himself, to engage directly with Zelenskyy as the Ukrainian president. I think he's said on many occasions he's illegitimate and that he's not going to deal with him. So it will be actually a test of whether Putin has any flexibility or any compromise in him which is necessary to achieve a just peace, which is the only peace that will be durable, as to whether he is prepared to meet with Zelenskyy. And I hope that he is. I mean, I would be welcoming of that.
It's going to be very interesting to watch what comes out in the hours, days, weeks. Let's hope that that trilateral meeting does happen. We might get all three of you back to comment on it if and when we get a resolution. But for now, we'll leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much to this evening's guests, Christopher Steele, former MI6 officer who led the Russia desk at the UK's Secret Intelligence Service, Brandon Weichert, former US Congressional Staffer and geopolitical analyst, and Peter Zalmayev, political scientist and director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative, joining us for this episode of CounterPoints. We appreciate all of your contributions. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you to everyone joining us at home on this episode of CounterPoints. To watch all of our latest debates and interviews, be sure to subscribe to Al Arabiya English on YouTube. And of course, you can follow us on X and TikTok for all our latest debates. We'll see you next time.